Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar today focused on the federal clean energy workforce. I'm really pleased to be joined not only by my colleagues from the Federation of American Scientists, but also by a wonderful group of clean energy experts who are all former DOE employees. I'm really excited to hear from them about the value of federal talent initiatives to the clean energy transition, and also share a little bit about FAS's work with the Department of Energy on the issue, including a recent report that we released in July that was included in the registration for this event. My name is Zoe Bruns. I'm a senior project associate at the Federation of American Scientists, or FAS. And before we fully dive into our discussion today, I just wanted to do a little bit of signposting. And Addie, we can go ahead and flip to our next slide. So first, I'll just give a brief overview of FAS for those of you who might not be familiar with everything we do. And then I'll talk briefly about some of the findings from that recent report I mentioned, some of the recommendations that we have to continue to strengthen the Department of Energy's workforce and the larger federal clean energy workforce. And then I will pass it over to our moderator, and we'll kick off our panel discussion and talk a little bit more about the value of talent more generally, and hear from folks who have been in that space. And then we'll have a brief Q&A at the end. So Addie, I'll go in and kick off and talk a little bit about who the Federation of American Scientists are, who FAS is. You may have heard about us. We've been around since about the 1940s, but up until 2019, we were mainly doing work that focused on national security and nuclear information. And since 2019, we've been more broadly focused on the relationship between science, technology, and policy. We work in a number of different issue areas, but we started in 2019 with our Day One project, which is really focused on taking ideas for policy from technical experts, scientists, technologists, and helping translate them into actionable policy ideas, helping them adapt to a policymaker audience. And we continue to do that work, and we've expanded into all sorts of policy development and implementation work. As I mentioned, a number of different issue areas in addition to clean energy, including education, research and development, AI, wildfire prevention, bioeconomy, and we continue to do nuclear information work as well. But why talent? So one of the major tools that we use to achieve change in each of those areas is talent. Highly skilled people, I'm sure it's no surprise, highly skilled people are the foundation of policy. And we believe that helping federal agencies get more of that high quality talent in the door can make a huge impact across the federal government. One of our signature programs is the Talent Hub, which oversees our Impact Fellowship, which helps agencies identify talent needs and place experts in those high impact roles using flexible hiring mechanisms such as the Intergovernmental Personnel Act and others. And to date, I believe we've placed over 100 impact fellows across government in the last 2 years through this program. It's been a resounding success, and it underscores the value of and the need for more pathways into the federal government for these types of technical talent. And of course, our clean energy team is no stranger to this idea. One of our main focuses as a team since our origin has been how can we help Department of Energy and other agencies that are involved in clean energy, how can we help them build a stronger federal clean energy workforce? And we've come at this from a number of angles. So we have a couple different angles. I mentioned our impact fellowships, and our clean energy team oversees a clean energy impact fellowship as well. We have 2 cohorts of fellows that are currently in the Department of Energy across several different offices. They work on critical and emerging technologies. They work on the energy earthshots. They work in the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. There are 9 fellows currently in the Department of Energy, and we are currently soliciting interest in the next cohort. So we're excited that the program is continuing to grow. We use flexible hiring mechanisms, like I mentioned, like the Intergovernmental Personnel Act, as well as partners like ORISE, who you may be familiar with as well. In addition to impact fellowships, we also do technical assistance. We've done a few recruitment events for the Clean Energy Corps. We do some policy development, like the report that I'm going to be talking about today. And then we also have been designing some solutions for employee recognition at the Department of Energy, where we're going to spotlight Clean Energy Corps employees, help share their stories, and help put a face to the clean energy transition across the agency. So I want to talk briefly about some of the findings from this recent report and talk a little bit about the origin of the report as well. We released this in July, and what it really is meant to be is a summary of the lessons learned from FAS's work with the Department of Energy on some of the issues that I just spoke about. Some of our lessons learned so far We wanted to highlight DOE's successful strategies for getting talent in the door in the aftermath of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, because they've done a really fantastic job, and I'll touch on a couple of specifics in a moment. But we also wanted to identify places where they could continue to.
Sorry, we are having some technical difficulties. We'll be right with you. While we're waiting for her to come back, why don't we jump into the panel discussion, and then we can get back to the report afterwards. Does that work for you, Dr. Wilson?
Sure. I think maybe a good place to start would be for each of us to introduce ourselves, maybe 1 to 2 minutes. And maybe we can lay the groundwork for the rest of the discussion by sharing a little bit about what each of us are doing now and how we engaged or were part of the federal workforce at the department. So I can start. It's nice to be here with everyone. My name is Adria, and I work at Breakthrough Energy as a member of our policy and advocacy team and focus on innovation policy and hydrogen policy, but was at the Department of Energy for about 3 years in total, in the late teens, like 15 to 18, working in the hydrogen and fuel cell technologies office. And I'll maybe, throw a seed for our discussion saying I sort of landed there by accident. I was not looking to join the federal workforce, but made it there. So with that, I'll just go around my screen and maybe turn it to Tim first to introduce yourself, and then Tanya, and then Tarek. And I'll ask you to share where you're at now and where you were when you were at DOE. How's that, Tim?
Sounds great. Thanks, Dr. Wilson. Tim Cronin. I am currently head of policy at Lunar Energy. We are a startup based in Mountain View, California. We're developing a suite of products to help households electrify, and to do so with backup power, focusing first on a new residential energy storage product. And I previously had the opportunity to work in DOE's Office of Policy, specifically focusing on the Biden administration's efforts to reinvest in energy communities. And for me, that was with a specific focus on coal communities. Dr. Das?
Thank you. So my name is Tanya Das. I am with a nonprofit think tank called the Bipartisan Policy Center. I lead our team's work on energy innovation policy, which is basically how do we go from basic science to commercial product in the energy space. I was with Department of Energy as the Chief of Staff for the Office of Science in 2021. And before that, spent time in Congress and was a AAAS fellow. I think fellowships, which we can get into more, are a great way to get into federal service. I have a background in electrical engineering before coming into this world.
Thanks, Tanya. Hello, Tim and Adria. It's so wonderful to be here. And my name is Tarek Shah. And until recently, I was the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Energy for the first year and a half of the Biden-Harris administration. And during that time, we were able to affect the largest reorganization of the Department of Energy in its history, where we stood up a new division on clean energy demonstration and deployment, which I think is really important to today's discussion. We got to do other cool things together, including reinvigorating our loan program, restarting our appliance efficiency standards program, developing new focus areas on industrial decarbonization, and something I'm really, really proud of, requiring the agency to create new procedures to incorporate equity, justice, domestic manufacturing, and jobs considerations into our financial grants and awards for the first time. Prior to that, I served on President Biden's transition team. I've spent some time on the campaign, and during the Obama-Biden administration, I worked at the White House Defense Department and the Department of Energy.
Great. Thank you all. Zoe, we just went around and introduced ourselves, talked about where we have been and what our experience at DOE looked like. And now we can turn it back over to you, if that's okay, so we can get some more of the report findings, which I think will really help with the panel discussion.
100%. No, I'm so glad that we could meet all of our panelists. Apologies. Let me just jump right back in. And I was just about to talk about how wonderful DOE has been on talent for the last few years, which is exciting. I hope I didn't cut off too much, but I was just saying that DOE has really risen to the occasion. Addie, if you want to go to the next slide, we can jump right in talking about all of these successes. So DOE was handed a huge amount of responsibility with Bill and Ira, and they really rose to the occasion. They used the direct hire authority to hire, probably even bigger than this number, but at the time of writing, nearly 700 employees. They had over 100,000 applicants to the Clean Energy Corps, just a huge amount of interest in a once-in-a-generation moment, and they really took advantage of it. They've been standing up new offices like nobody's business, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, and they've been staffing up existing offices like the Loan Programs Office and the Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains Office, as well as using, like we just mentioned with the Impact Fellows. FAS is not the only organization that helps bring in technical talent. And DOE has done a great job of using flexible hiring mechanisms to bring folks in that are, top of their field. So we can go to the next slide and talk about kind of how they can build on the successes and continue to strengthen their workforce. This is just a testament to how well they've done with such a lofty goal. They've proved that these strategies work, that things like the direct hire authority and flexible hiring mechanisms, that these are strategies that help get people in the door more quickly, and help get high quality people in the door quickly as well. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of recommendations that we had from the report on how DOE can continue to build on those successes. First off, just continuing to do things like using remote flexibility. So offering folks the opportunity to work remotely when they come on board has been just lauded by folks inside and outside of the agency. Using those flexible hiring mechanisms, working with partner organizations. If you know anything about talent or flexible hiring or tour of service programs, it takes quite a bit of investment in those relationships with organizations like FAS, but also like Clean Energy Business Network, Clean Energy for America, the Partnership for Public Service. It takes time and energy to invest in those relationships. And so continuing to do that can help expand the use of those mechanisms as well. And then we identified a couple of other areas where DOE could use successful strategies that it is to expand the types of things that they're working on. So they have been setting up strategic plans for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you could take that same approach to recruiting for senior leadership talent, for example, which is a notoriously difficult group to recruit and retain. In order to kind of make the case for continuing to use authorities like the direct hire authority, they could undertake an assessment and kind of show like, hey, this is how we've been using it. This is how successful it's been. Really prove their case to the folks in Congress who, as I'll get to in a second, should consider extending that authority. So these are some of the recommendations for DOE. I'll move quickly to some of the recommendations we had for Congress as well. Obviously, DOE is not, they're doing a lot of great things, but there are a lot of other folks in the ecosystem that can help support DOE in strengthening its workforce and its talent acquisition. And Congress has a lot of power in the area. So number one, we really feel that because the Clean Energy Corps and the Direct Hire Authority have been so successful, that Congress should consider extending the authority past its current expiration date of 2027. It should also expand to other offices within DOE. Not every office that, there's a lot of offices in DOE that contribute to the mission and for the clean energy transition that aren't currently eligible to use the direct hire authority. And then finally, I'll just mention that human capital is not something that is I think it's exciting to talk about, but it's not always at the top of the list for Congress, but it requires a lot of investment. And that means you have to put resources aside. And we're pushing in this report for having Congress increase the funding to DOE's Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer. This says FY24. we'll see how that goes. I think in the future, continuing to increase investment in workforce and human capital initiatives should be at the top of their list. We can go to the next slide, Addie. And then finally, we wanted to talk to the larger clean energy advocacy ecosystem about how they can get involved. I mentioned before, it's not just FAS that cares about federal clean energy talent or federal talent in general, but it's lots of different folks. And some of them might be earlier on in the process, might not know how to engage DOE. First off, I'll start at the bottom, but just advocating for more flexible hiring authorities, for strategies for DOE, talking to Congress about the types of things I just mentioned, all really, really helpful. Helping build those relationships, taking a proactive approach. There's a lot on the plates of federal offices, and if outside organizations can take the opportunity to build relationships with place-based organizations, workforce development organizations, higher education institutions, that is all really, really helpful to DOE and take some of that work off of their plate. And then FAS has done some of this work. I mentioned the recruitment events that we had for the Clean Energy Corps, but helping identify those skills gaps in the workforce. I think it takes an all hands on deck approach in figuring out kind of where the gaps are going to be in this burgeoning clean energy workforce. And outside organizations, especially ones that have kind of a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the workforce world, can be really helpful to DOE in figuring out where those gaps are. So I just wanted to say, I think this is the end of my portion and we can head back to our panel. And Adria, I'm assuming that you've already introduced yourself. So I don't know if I get to brag about you a little bit, but
we could probably skip that.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, Dr. Adria Wilson is wonderful. And if you have any questions or if you'd like to get involved with this work, I have my email on here and a lot of you know me, I think, but please do reach out. We're excited to continue building on this work, and we're excited to have all of you at this webinar to share in it as well. So Adria, I will pass it back to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Zoe. And thanks for walking through the report. This is one of those secretly very exciting topics, and I think I probably share that sentiment with everybody else on the panel today, because the people who work for the federal government are a special sort in a good way. There's a mission drive that brings someone into public service that is really commendable and worth lifting up. And the amount of work that there is to be done and the amount of impact that there is to drive is really huge, especially at this moment in time with all of the programs being built and run. And so, I think before I start asking the panelists more questions based on the intros we've already had, I wanted to really underline how much people matter to doing this work. And that's true for anything, whether you're whenever you're trying to make something happen, the people who are running the show, the people who are doing the dirty work or the grunt work, all the way throughout the organization really matter. And I think that does get overlooked sometimes, but the talent at DOE are the ones that are going to make or break some of our biggest dreams when it comes to clean energy and climate. And so the things that Tark has alluded to already that the DOE has been establishing are very exciting, but I think with this group, I want us to dig in more on our first person lenses of our experience so that we can understand what it looks like for talent to move through from the very beginnings of recruitment to coming out of the DOE or any federal agency, really. I think this crew is going to have some really interesting perspectives to share on what all of the steps of the life cycle of an employee for the federal government hold for someone. So for those of you in the audience who are interested in federal service, this could be really interesting. For policymakers in the audience, it could be really insightful to think about the shared or not shared experiences we all have. So we've kind of gone through and given a little bit of our histories, and Tark, you started to talk through the things that you were very proud of having accomplished in the department while you were there. I wanted to see if you wanted to say anything more about what drew you in and what your experience was like moving through your role, and what you found from your previous experiences that really served you when you were there. And just teeing up Tanya and Tim, I'm going to ask you the same thing. So maybe we can start, Tart, with your comments, and then Tanya, and then Tim, you can sort of chime in.
Great. Well, thanks for that. I served all 8 years in President Obama's administration, and I was really proud of that service. And after it all, I was also very tired and ready for a break. But when, during the 2020 campaign, President Biden proposed the most ambitious climate platform in the history of major party nominees for president, I knew I was ready to get off the bench. And that's because based on my time in government, I knew that to accomplish that platform, we'd need the right mix of experienced hands at the federal level, voices from the state level where climate policy innovation had really progressed rapidly during the Trump years, and a revamped federal government that, as candidate Biden had said at the time, looked like America. And all of those people, especially the political appointees, also somehow had to function as a cohesive team from day one. And so, I worked on President Biden's transition to help find those people, and realized over the course of that I had something to offer as well to help the administration get out of the starting blocks. And so I was really thrilled to recruit amazing people like Tanya, and then be part of that core of people who started in the administration, who believe that climate change is an existential threat, who understand that the scale and pace of the changes we need to make, especially over these next few years, are something that's never been attempted before in human history, and that the United States has to lead, and that the president can lead through his actions of his White House and his federal agencies like the Department of Energy. So, in other words, I served at DOE because I saw a huge opportunity, and I see a huge opportunity for our collective future, and I saw a role for myself in helping achieve that. Over to you, Tanya.
Yeah, Tanya, do you want to share your experience?
Yeah, definitely. So, as I alluded to at the beginning, I did not expect to end up in public service when I was in school. I was getting my PhD as an engineer. I was like very much on that path. I thought I would try to like work in academia or industry like all of my peers were around me. Wasn't really aware of a lot of other career options. But I think deep within me, there was also that desire to serve the world and somehow, help our country function better. And that is what led me to the policy space ultimately. I didn't know a lot of folks who had my background who worked in this space, but I think over the last several years, like there's been more and more of a growing contingency of us, like here in Washington, D.C., who have STEM backgrounds. If that was something I had known about as an undergrad, I may have, come to this world sooner. And that's just something that I want folks to know, who are maybe still in school, or who are looking to recruit smart young people. I think the STEM curricula doesn't always prepare us necessarily for careers that are outside of like the traditional STEM fields. But I think that is like such a huge talent pipeline for these types of jobs at DOE and other agencies. So once I made my way into the policy world, as I mentioned, I spent some time in Congress, and working for DOE was like quickly became like a bit of a dream job, because understanding like how one branch of government worked, but then actually the idea of being able to be on the other side, actually implementing the laws of Congress, that was like super, super exciting. And so I was really, really thrilled for the opportunity when the Biden administration came in, and just to be interviewed for a position there, and then to actually be accepted and get to do the work there was just a dream come true. So it was a really exciting time.
That's really interesting. And I love that you are already highlighting how important it is to start building out that pipeline to early career folks, smart young people who really do want to serve. They are definitely out there. And I think many of them don't realize that there is an opportunity, let alone a pathway to getting into federal service. Tim, how about you tell us about your experience?
Sounds great. I also was very excited leading up to the 2020 election cycle to see the very ambitious clean energy platforms being rolled out by various candidates. And I was listening to a podcast by David Roberts, Dr. Volts by some, and he was talking about how they're all more impressive than anything we've seen proposed in a presidential campaign previously. But there is a little bit of trepidation that what some of them, probably most of them, weren't fully taken into account is that to be enacted into law, they were going to need to be able to receive the support of Senator Manchin. I grew up in West Virginia, and so when I heard that, it really hit me, really resonated, and have always felt deeply that we need to, as we deploy clean energy, be reinvesting in our coal communities too. And so when I heard that, that really inspired me to see if there's a role that I could play in that. I had been working in the private sector for over 6 years doing clean energy project development and finance in San Francisco. I decided to do a stint with West Virginia University, working with a team to demonstrate that clean energy deployment in West Virginia can be good for the economy. And then once the Biden platform for clean energy became ironed out a little bit, we did some updated modeling showing how specific proposals like the Advanced Energy Manufacturing Grant Program and the 48C clean energy manufacturing tax credit with a carve out for energy communities, that could really help economies like West Virginia to thrive in clean energy deployment. And so I had the opportunity to do that. And then once we got that research out and the Biden administration was up and running, I kind of felt like, well, now I got to help come through on that. And I think I saw a posting on LinkedIn for the FAS Impact Fellowships. And I saw that as an opportunity to come in a little bit smoother way with federal service. I had some challenging experiences in the past with federal service, and also to really shape the role to do precisely what I was wanting to do, which is focused on the efforts to reinvest in energy communities. So I submitted an application that was exactly that, saying I squarely want to work on those efforts. Put me in, coach, and was happy to get that opportunity.
That's awesome. What I'm hearing from all of you is that you were inspired in some way to turn toward DOE, whether that was something you were seeking, for a long time, or it just sort of kind of showed up in your career, as it sounds like it did for you, Tanya, and that's my experience too. So now if we shift towards what it was like being at the department, I would love to hear a little bit from everyone about what you were surprised about, what was different than your experience outside of federal service, not necessarily bad, but with every sort of, job, right? There are things that you have to tolerate to do the things you love. So I'm curious if you can give like a landscape of like how you recruited your skills from those previous experience and used your passion to begin to affect change. What was surprising, like I said, and if there were any challenges, what would you want to share with the group here? How about we just keep, I'm looking at you, Tarek, you can't tell, but how about we start there?
Okay, sure. Well, I think one of the unheralded, we're heralding it on this call, as you started, Atria, in your remarks to kick off this panel. It's the people at DOE that get things done. And when we created the Clean Energy Corps, we actually created a screening criteria for a basic set of criteria that we're looking for from everyone on the team. And, you might think those initial screens are for characteristics like prior federal experience or knowing the federal acquisition rules or, a really deep experience on some specific climate technology. But actually, we started way before that. We started with fundamental characteristics that are proven as for critical success in government. We worked with HR scientists, data scientists to come up with some characteristics that really exemplify really amazing government workers. And they are things like humility and organizational savvy and hard work and resilience in the face of obstacles. So, people who can persevere even when the going is tough, especially as members of teams, are so important in the DOE context because everything is done on a team there. And, it is because DOE staff are trying to do something that no group of people have ever done before, which is to use this largest source of funds ever allocated for the environment and get our planet on track to save us from the existential crisis of climate change. And to do that, you kind of have to be humble. You have to be savvy. You are going to have to work incredibly hard, and you're going to have to pick yourself up from the inevitable failures that occur over and over and over because you're doing something that no one's ever attempted before. So, I think those are some good, some characteristics that make good DOE team members. And, what is not surprising, but really exciting to me is that we found that over and over and over in thousands of, hundreds and thousands of people that we hired.
That is such a good point. And, it's one that the report touches on too, that it's less about trying to find those qualities. It's making sure you're looking for the right skill sets. So that work that you did was so important. And then the next step is figuring out how to enable DOE to move through those candidates more effectively, bring them in, because something that the report also touches on, and that I'm sure every single panelist has seen, is that many of the people at DOE are doing multiple jobs. Like, no kidding about the hard work piece. Could crowdsource and bring in many more if we were trying to enable the DOE to do even more. More people would be amazing to have. Tanya, how about we shift over to you? What was your experience in the building? What would you say were some of the things that struck you while you were working there?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me the most, I think a lot of us who never worked in government, I certainly had this perception before I worked in government, we have this perception that government is very, very slow, right? Not a lot happens. It takes forever to get something done. Like, what are they doing all day in Washington, D.C.? That was the thing that surprised me the most when I was at DOE, is how fast-paced everything is. I mean, it's a massive organization that it's absolutely, like, the bureaucracy exists for a reason, because it is the federal government, and you need to make good decisions that you can stand by, that you can justify to, American taxpayers and Congress. And so there's a reason why there are a lot of checks and balances in place, but it was also a very, very, very fast-paced job. So there was never a dull moment. It was never boring. All of those perceptions quickly went out the window on day one. I think one thing that I really appreciated, to what Tarek was saying, is the people at DOE are the ones who, and especially the career staff, the staff who are there regardless of who the president is, the staff who are there between administrations and are the ones who are continuing the good work regardless of which political is in charge. I was really, really impressed and kind of blown away by their willingness to partner with politicals on implementing the agenda of the president, and also their commitment to making sure that the way that we are implementing agendas and ideas are something that is going to be durable and long-serving, because the nature of the US political system is that we have a new president every 4 to 8 years. And if that results in a change of party, at the end of the day, the politicals will go in and out, but the career staff are the one who have to bear the burden of those shifting priorities. And I was really, really impressed by the staff's ability to check both of those boxes of helping implement a political mission while also building in that longevity, so that we can see things be implemented in a sustained, durable manner. And that is something that I think is just a really key quality for any federal staff to have, in addition to the qualities that were mentioned before.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think this the career staff are like the silent heroes, of the work, and have to have something akin to creativity alongside resilience, because keeping the actual science and engineering and technological focus moving forward through administrations, through different priorities, requires, to some extent, justifying that you're meeting sometimes overlapping priorities. One political party might prioritize one element of the energy mission over another, but at the end of the day, the work that the staff is doing can achieve both, maybe. So it's definitely it's definitely never boring. Couldn't agree more there. Tim, how about you? What was your experience like?
Yeah, I would say no huge surprises. Definitely experienced some of those checks and balances and robust processes that Dr. Das mentioned. But I don't think that's a huge surprise to anybody coming into federal service. Maybe the full extent of it for getting some travel approved, maybe it was a little bit of a surprise after being in the private sector for most of my career. But I think everybody knows that just comes with it. They are checks and balances for a reason. There's good intention behind them, and God bless the staff that helps make sure that we all keep it in line and do things properly. So overall, no huge surprises. In terms of what I would maybe offer to other folks that are coming into federal service, is that because of those checks and balances, and because of, like Tarek was saying, everything needing to be done on a team basis, it definitely takes some process and a lot of time. And I would say if you're coming in with a list of 20 or 30 things you're trying to get done, and it's in a limited period of time, I would scale that back at least to two to three things, possibly just one thing. Just say to yourself, if I, in my 12-month fellowship, get this one thing done, it will have been successful. And you have to be flexible. You have to receive the input of others, especially the career staff that know how to actually advance things through the proper process. But if you can just keep that focus on just one or a handful of objectives, I think you'll find the experience more fulfilling in the end.
That's really good perspective there. I'd like to maybe stay with you, Tim, and sort of transition to after DOE now, and ask you what you're bringing with you now that you've left about your experience. How has your experience with the checks and balances and the process that sort of governs the good governance itself, how are you bringing that into what you're doing now, and how has that supported your career development? And I guess I'll also tag on, to be mindful of time, and this question I'll ask the others as well. What do you wish for the DOE now? Like, what has inspired you about your service that makes you care about DOE, and like what DOE is doing now? What are you passionate about because of your service? So with that, I'll stop.
Sounds good. Yeah, I would say the main thing taking from DOE and going back to the private sector is just familiarity with all of the new programs that are working to deploy clean energy. I had some projects while I was at DOE where really had to just go through every provision of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So just coming back to the private sector where everybody's trying to figure that stuff out and figure out specifically where there are opportunities for them, that was invaluable, just having that level of familiarity, both with the statutes and the new programs at a high level, but also just how they actually work, like how you go from a notice of intent, a request for information, to a funding opportunity announcement, to multiple rounds of review, just having that familiarity. Because I would say, again, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, lots of clean energy companies here. As compared to DC, relatively few people have been involved with those processes for administering grants and things like that. So really valuable to now implement the administration's pursue their objectives, but on the private sector side, trying to apply to those programs and deploy projects. Maybe I'll leave it there in the interest of time.
That's great. Tarek, what are you passionate about because of your service? I feel like you could probably say many things because I know you're a very passionate person.
Well, thank you for that. I'm passionate about our planet. I mean, for me, that's where I start and end. For me, it's about impact, how I can personally do the most good. My core issue is addressing our climate change and our national security. And I found companionship in like-minded people and people at DOE. So now I spend my days helping from the outside make sure that DOE is the best version of itself that it can be. And so some of the things that are you see right in the Q&A, people talk about some of the challenges associated with getting into federal service. The length of time it takes to hire people is a real killer. And so trying to advocate for new solutions there. Certainly the direct hire authority that came with bill and IRA is amazing. But as Zoe mentioned at the outset, that doesn't exist across the department, and it will expire soon. And the regular hiring process isn't ideal. So helping DOE leaders think through new ways or maximize ways they currently have, and finding ways to hire for the skills they need. Expanding direct hire, I think, is just something that's so important. Really happy that FAS has included it in their report. And also thinking about our democracy more broadly. When you see proposals like those from former President Trump to stack the federal government with tens of thousands of ideologues and career positions, you understand why the impulse to make sure the merit hiring process it has lots of checks and balances. I totally get it. But so some of the other things that I'm passionate about and spend my time on is thinking about the broader trends as affecting our democracy, how they have repercussions on relatively mundane things like hiring a scheduler at DOE or a new technology program manager. And, one thing I'll just say to close out is, if we are going to wrestle with something as awesome and huge as the climate crisis, then we're also going to have to really work on strengthening our democratic foundations as well.
Through words. And what I think has been an underlying theme here is that the work happening in the department is wonderful and is trying to address those goals. And one of the biggest rate limiters is finding ways to responsibly and efficiently bring people in and keep them there. We didn't touch on this very much, but there's a lot of great information in the report about how we can better retain and reshape the processes for bringing folks in so that it's more appealing to the workforce of today. Taking moderator's privilege to rant just for 30 seconds, I was shocked to learn that there are only 4% of DOE's employees are under 30 years old. And we'll leave it there instead of saying all the feelings I have about that. Tanya, to close us out, I want to shift the question a little bit for you, because you brought up at the beginning of our conversation how much potential you think there is in tapping into universities and STEM student bodies, people who are passionate about some of the same missions that DOE has, and bringing them in. Based on your experience, are there other things that you think are important about the way DOE is seeking out and recruiting its workforce or retaining its workforce? And if you would rather just talk about the other things that you brought out of your experience too, please feel free, but I'm curious if you have other thoughts.
I very much wish you were a panelist, Adria, so I could hear all of your thoughts on all these questions, because I know you have a lot more to say, but I'll just save that for the next time I see you to pick your brain. But I think one thing I just want to say off the bat is I have a STEM background, so that's kind of reflective of some of the comments I made, but I think there are plenty of people who work at DOE who do not have STEM backgrounds. And so all of those skills are very complementary and very necessary to doing the good work that happens at DOE. I think I saw like a question about that in the chat box. So I think there are tons of opportunities. I don't think like a STEM degree is by any means a prerequisite. I was surprised going through undergrad where my school would have career fairs and organizations like NASA would show up and like the Jet Propulsion Lab would show up, and in addition to like all the big companies like Google and Facebook and whatever, trying to recruit engineers. So we know it's possible for the government to be doing this. I definitely think that there is huge opportunity for DOE to be doing more things like that and like getting out into our nation, getting out into schools. Like I imagine, especially as we're talking about diversity and recruiting from schools that serve diverse populations with that explicit focus, getting out there. Our nation has some existing infrastructure for the agency to tap into. So it isn't like we don't need to start from scratch on a lot of these things. And I think that can go a huge way in making progress on these issues. I do just want to make one additional comment about your earlier question of like, what are you taking away with you from your work there? Because something Tim said earlier really resonated with me. Tim, you being from West Virginia, I'm from Michigan, which now I don't know what its politics are, but when I grew up there, it was like very much a purple/red state. And that has, I think, informed all of my, like how I approach public service. Because the thing that I have taken away that was like really, I think, just became even more concrete after coming out of DOE was anything that we need to do in the policy world, anything that we do, it needs to be durable in order to be impactful. That has kind of like laid the foundation for how I approach my work now, and is why I also work at a bipartisan organization now. And it just goes back to, what we were talking about earlier with the career staff and how important of a role that they play in like making sure that things are steady state, that there is some semblance of steady state, regardless of who the president is. I think that is going to be important for our success on this mission that we're on for the next 30 years in the long run, is really finding ways for all of this to be a durable and a long-term goal. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for sharing your experiences. Zoe, stop me if you want to, but I'm looking at the chat questions and I figure we could transition into trying to answer some of those for the next couple of minutes. Great. And there are a few in here. First of all, I will call out that Lino dropped in a note saying that they are currently hiring. And I think this maybe brings up generally a great way to find out about opportunities is to network with folks who already work in the department, to learn about what they're looking for, what their needs are. That's probably more like general advice than DOE specific, but just want to, highlight that comment. And then, I think we have a few questions about remaining barriers to being hired on at the department. So maybe panelists, if you have any comments there, that would be great to share. And then I'll just say that I'm seeing a couple of questions about like how entry-level folks can get into the department. And I'll keep that like general approach level unless any of the panelists have some clear sort of guiding directions for folks about specific needs at the department, which I'm not sure that any of us are really well disposed to answer, but I'll just leave that on the table. So going back to the question about how can, maybe I'll start at that last one. How can you get in as an entry level or like early career person? I'll just volunteer. My pathway into the department was through an ORISE fellowship, and there are several fellowships that can become feeders for federal service. And it's a nice way to test out whether or not you like public service, or, just to explore what's happening at the Department of Energy or really any agency or national lab. So I will throw that out there panelists, not sure if you have other things you'd like to say about ways that people who are earlier in their career could think about getting involved in federal service. Anyone?
I'll just reiterate, I had a good experience with the FAS Impact Fellowship. And yeah, I think that's usually for experienced professionals, but I think, you know, a handful of years of experience is sufficient. Yeah, so great experience there.
In the chat, I put a link to the webpage that lists all of DOE's stipend-based internships. And actually, DOE has some special authority to hire interns into full-time roles at the completion of their internships, and sort of outside of the regular full merit hiring process. So that is another great way into the department.
That is worth repeating. And I think FAS also redropped it into the chat because it is worth repeating and writing too. There are paid internships. You should go look for them. Thanks for that, Tarek. Tanya, anything to add there at all?
I just would reiterate fellowships. I think that there are dozens and dozens of different ones now, many more than when I first started in this field. And I think they're explicitly made for people who do not have previous government experience and are wanting to get that experience, and are very much targeted at people who are new to this world. So I think that's a great way to get involved.
Awesome. Let's shift over to if there is anything to say about there still being barriers in red tape. This might get into the zone. Zoe, I will just sort of like break our virtual fourth wall between the panel and you. If there's anything you want to highlight from the report here, please feel free to jump in. But panelists first, anything to comment there about the red tape of being hired on in particular? I can start by saying it wasn't that hard for me, especially via like coming in via the fellows process. I guess this kind of gets back to when you know the people you're about to go work for, you're trying to apply for a role with, maybe there's a little bit more daylight on what the process looks like that you wouldn't get if you were just putting a resume into USA Jobs through the typical process. But Tim, I see you're off mute as well.
Yeah, I was going to try to throw in 3 quick perspectives. First, just a little background. I had an experience during the Obama administration where I was accepted for a clerkship with Council of Environmental Quality, moved to Washington, D.C. from where I was attending law school, and then after having moved, found out that my background check didn't go through, never learned why that was. And so that was obviously a challenging experience. For, you know, what we can do going forward, I don't know if that's actually within the power of DOE, but if there's a way to complete the background check before you're asking somebody to quit their existing job or move, things like that, that's huge, obviously, for just obvious reasons. So that's one. Second, I would say, in terms of the red tape, got to go through the proper process when you're in federal government, but I would just always encourage folks to think about what's the substantive goal first, prioritize that first, and then figure out how to go through the process. I feel like sometimes there is a tendency to just like start with the process and not always focus on what are we trying to achieve. So that's another red tape thing. And then last one, I actually had to end my fellowship a little bit earlier than planned because of some healthcare stuff that came up. Again, limited ability for folks at DOE to change this, or the folks offering fellowships. But I just want to touch on the point because I think it's important. Robust benefits helps retain talent, and especially for fertility services, which are hard to obtain, often not covered by insurance. It really helps make a difference with retention.
Thanks for sharing that. And it is definitely the case that benefits are kind of like another component of someone's overall pay. And it's a very real thing for like public servants to not get as rich, you know, of benefits as you might receive elsewhere in the private sector. So it's a very real challenge. Tarek, Tanya, anything else to add? And then Zoe, do you want to jump in at all with anything from the report findings?
I'll just add one thing, which is that you know, for people applying to DOE, not asking you to give it askance, but it is at its core a national security agency. You know, it was founded by as part of the agency came from the Manhattan Project and the Atomic Energy Commission, and so for many, many decades, DOE's background check process has been super cumbersome. And as we were standing up the Clean Energy Corps, we really thought carefully about the language we put in job descriptions to make sure that Clean Energy Corps positions where there was no national security nexus in terms of the information that a individual would need to have access for, were very clearly classified as not having a requirement for certain types of more intense background checks, because we did experience a lot of these issues early on in the Biden administration with very intense, cumbersome, years-long background check processes that are super frustrating, and I think a barrier for federal employment in agencies like DOE and other agencies. So just something that I think the federal government should continue to work on, which is really identifying where you need to dive so deeply into people's backgrounds for them to be able to do their job, or where maybe they don't.
Thanks, Tarek. Tanya, if you have anything burning to share, great, because then I see we're almost at 2 o'clock. So I'll just kind of pitch it back over to Zoe to sort of wrap it up anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I will just say, I know this is popular in other parts of government, and that folks are starting to take a customer experience approach to different federal services. And I think human capital and hiring should be no exception. I spent a lot of time on the USA Jobs Reddit, which is really strange, but people have a lot of questions that maybe the answer would be obvious to those of us who work on federal talent. And it's not obvious to a layperson who's applying to a federal job for the first time. So I think like explaining these processes, taking that customer experience approach could go a long way towards just understanding why I'm not hearing back after 6 months of waiting on a job application. But I will end it there and just say thank you so much to Adrian, to all of our panelists for participating, and to the folks who attended. This is, I'm sure we all agree that I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it's incredibly important, and I do find it really exciting. And I appreciate everyone for all of your thoughtful questions and thoughtful answers and thoughts on this. So thanks so much, and we'll make sure to post the recording as soon as it's ready. Thanks again, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.